It wasn't the election results. It wasn't the specific tax policy. It wasn't even the personality sitting in the Oval Office. It was the arithmetic. The math of sovereign debt is merciless. It ignores political mandates. It ignores campaign promises. It operates with the cold precision of gravity. When a nation's debt service costs exceed its ability to generate surplus, the outcome is already written. The pattern is unmistakable. History does not stutter. It follows a rigid script. We are watching a mathematical inevitability collide with political reality. The date 2026 is not chosen at random. It represents a convergence of debt maturity walls, a moment where the interest on the national credit card becomes the single largest line item in the budget. No president can legislate away compound interest. No executive order can suspend the laws of solvency. The trajectory is fixed. The constraints are absolute. To understand why the next administration is trapped, we must look backward. We must examine the wreckage of empires that believed they were exceptions. They were wrong. The mechanism of collapse is always the same. It begins with peak dominance. It moves to unsustainable costs. It attempts a monetary shortcut. It ends in social fracture. The incentive is always to print. The risk is always ignored until it is too late. Here is the evidence. Consider the Roman Empire, specifically the crisis of the 3rd century. The anchor date is to 135 AD, but the rot began earlier under Nero. Rome reached peak dominance, but the costs of maintaining the legions and the bureaucracy became unsustainable. The emperors faced a choice: cut spending and risk a coup, or debase the currency. The incentive structure made the choice obvious. They chose the shortcut. They began clipping the edges of coins. Then they diluted the silver content of the denarius. Under Augustus, the coin was nearly pure silver. By the mid-3rd century, under the military emperors, it was merely bronze washed in a thin layer of silver that rubbed off in a soldier's hand. The resulting inflation was catastrophic. Prices soared by 1,000%. The human cost was visible in the markets. A legionnaire, once paid in sound money, found his salary could no longer buy a loaf of bread. The middle class was obliterated. Wealth fled the cities. Citizens moved to the countryside, trading their liberty for protection on large estates, planting the seeds of medieval feudalism. They sought hard assets because the currency had become a lie. The state survived, but the society was broken. Just like Rome, the Spanish Empire in the 16th and 17th centuries walked the same path. Under Philip II, Spain was the master of the world. The anchored period is the late 1500s. Spain controlled the Americas and vast trade networks, but the costs of endless wars in the Netherlands and against England were crushing. The crown's spending outpaced its income. Their monetary shortcut was not clipping coins, but the importation of massive amounts of silver from the New World. They believed silver was wealth. They were wrong. Silver is merely a medium of exchange. When you double the money supply without doubling the goods and services, you do not create wealth. You create the price revolution. Inflation ravaged the Spanish economy. A Castilian peasant saw the price of grain triple in a generation. Spanish industry collapsed because it was cheaper to buy foreign goods than to produce them at home. The empire defaulted on its debt for times during the reign of Philip II alone. The flight to hard assets was desperate. The nobility bought land and titles, while the productive economy withered. Spain remained a political entity, but its economic soul was hollowed out, leaving it a second-rate power for centuries. Just like Spain, the Weimar Republic provides the most terrifying modern example. The year is 1923. Germany was crushed by the debts of World War I and the reparations demanded by the Treaty of Versailles. The industrial heartland of the Ruhr was occupied by the French. The government's tax revenue collapsed. The chosen shortcut was the printing press. The Reichsbank began monetizing the debt on an industrial scale. The arithmetic took over. In early 1922, the mark was stressed. By late 1923, it was dust. The inflation was not linear, it was exponential. A university professor, a man of status and education, found that his life savings could not purchase a cup of coffee. He was forced to burn his library books for heat because wood was too expensive. The middle class did not just lose their money. They lost their faith in the institutions of society. The flight into hard assets was chaotic. People bought pianos, machinery, anything that wasn't paper. The social fracture was total, creating the vacuum that allowed extremism to take root. The pattern repeats in 7 distinct stages. Stage 1 is sound money, where the currency is backed by hard assets or strict discipline. Stage 2 is the layering of liabilities, where the state promises more than it can fund through taxation. Stage 3 is the pivot to currency debasement, a subtle shift where the government begins to borrow from itself, or dilute the money supply to cover the gap. Stage 4 is the emergence of inflation, initially dismissed as transitory or driven by supply shocks. Stage 5 is the fatal acceleration, where the cost of living rises faster than wages, and the public begins to lose psychological trust in the currency. Stage 6 is the flight to safety, where capital abandons financial assets for tangible goods, land, and commodities. Stage 7 is the inevitable reset, where the old currency is destroyed or revalued, and wealth is transferred from creditors to debtors, just like Weimar. The United States is currently navigating the treacherous waters between Stage 4 and Stage 5. The math facing the administration in 2026 is not a matter of partisan opinion, it is a matter of ledger entries. Current data suggests that by 2026, the United States will face a massive wall of maturing debt that must be refinanced at significantly higher interest rates. The interest payments alone are projected to consume a percentage of tax revenue that historically signals a sovereign debt crisis. The constraints on Donald Trump or any occupant of the White House are absolute. To stop the inflation, they must cut spending or raise rates, which would crash the economy and the tax base. To save the economy, they must lower rates and print money, which accelerates the inflation. Under these constraints, the rational move for the state is to choose inflation, as it is the only way to deleverage the debt in real terms without an explicit default. There is a counter-argument often cited by modern economists. Many argue that the United States is unique because it holds the world reserve currency, allowing it to export its inflation and borrow indefinitely. They claim that productivity growth from technology, specifically artificial intelligence, will generate enough surplus to outrun the debt. But this argument fails to account for the velocity of compound interest. While technology is deflationary, the expansion of the monetary base required to service a $35 trillion debt load outpaces any efficiency gains. The incentive for the rest of the world is to de-dollarize to protect their own purchasing power, a trend we are already witnessing in real time. History shows that reserve currency status is a privilege that is lost precisely when it is abused to fund unsustainable deficits. The arithmetic is merciless. When debt service exceeds the growth rate of the economy, the currency must lose value to bridge the gap. The endgame arrives in one of 3 forms. The first is a controlled decline. This is the path of the British Empire after World War II. Anchored by the 1976 IMF bailout, Britain accepted a lower standard of living, capital controls, and a diminished role on the world stage to preserve social order. It was a slow, grinding loss of purchasing power that spanned decades. The second possibility is a chaotic collapse. This is the path of the French monarchy in 1789 or the Soviet Union in 1991, when the state refuses to adjust and attempts to enforce economic reality through coercion. The system snaps, the currency becomes worthless overnight, supply chains break, and the political structure dissolves entirely. The third and most likely outcome is a reset and restructure. This is the path of the United States in 1933 under Executive Order 6102, or the global economy at Bretton Woods in 1944. The rules are rewritten. The currency is devalued against real assets, often gold or a basket of commodities, and the debt is restructured. The system is saved, but the savings of the unaware are wiped out to balance the books.